The morning air hung heavy with mist, curling through the dense German forest. Like this, Karl's mind flickered, briefly to the homes he'd left behind, the small village near the Rhine, the bakery where his mother worked, the narrow cobblestone streets where he and his siblings had raced as children. Those memories were distant, fragile. Today, survival was memory enough. Positions, he murmured, almost to himself, but enough for the nearby men to hear. They slid into the shallow depressions in the soil, pulling branches over their heads, camouflaging themselves with mud. Each breath visible in the cold air, each heartbeat a drum of its own, as if the forest itself held its breath. The war had taught them caution. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig might be the herald of an attack. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours as the mist wavered, thickening and thinning like a living organism. Then, a distant whistle. The French artillery had begun, the faint thump of cannonballs reaching their ears, shaking the ground beneath their boots. Dust and splinters of bark flew as rounds struck trees, cutting the morning calm with sudden, violent interruptions. The Germans returned fire from concealed positions, the report of rifles cracking through the fog, each shot echoing, then fading into the distant cacophony of war. One soldier, young and trembling, kept lowering his rifle, shaking. I can't aim," he whispered to the man beside him. The veteran grunted, slapping a hand against the boy's shoulder. "Aim with your eyes, not your hands. Watch them, see their movements, and when they're closest, then you strike. It's the only way we survive today." From the French side, officers shouted commands, their voices rising above the din of battle. The two forces moved with deadly synchronicities, counterattacks, charges, retreats, choreographed in the grim dance of war. Trees splintered under artillery fire, and the ground became an uneven battlefield, soaked with mud, blood, and broken equipment. Karl adjusted his scope, peering through the mist. A French soldier had broken formation, advancing too quickly. Without hesitation, Karl's rifle cracked, and the man fell. Around him, The forest erupted into noise, shouts, gunfire, and the anguished cries of men. It was horrifyingly beautiful in its deadly precision, a terrifying ballet of life and death. Minutes bled into hours. Smoke thickened, and visibility dropped. The forest, once a haven of quiet green, transformed into a chaotic battlefield. Soldiers on both sides began to lose track of who was friend and who was foe. Every step was dangerous, every tree a potential hiding place for death. Karl's squad pressed forward, moving carefully between fallen comrades, dragging the wounded, shouting warnings. A French artillery shell exploded nearby, sending dirt and splinters into the air. Karl was thrown to the ground, ears ringing. When he looked up, the clearing was partially obscured by a haze of smoke. Bodies lay scattered, some unmoving, some writhing. The smell of gunpowder and iron was overwhelming, filling lungs with each ragged breath. Someone yelled. Karl crawled over to a young German soldier, his leg badly shattered. The boy's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. "Stay with me," Karl said, pressing his hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. There was no time to comfort him, no time for grief. Armies retreated slightly, regrouping, tending to the wounded, counting losses. The mist returned, curling was a crucible, testing men in the most extreme way imaginable, and as he closed his eyes, bracing for what the coming dawn would bring, the forest seemed to whisper around him a solemn, ghostly lullaby of war. Dawn arrived like a reluctant guest, pale and cold, filtering through the dense canopy of the German forest. Karl rubbed a sleep from his eyes, though it did little to erase the soreness that racked his body from the previous day's relentless combat. Around him, the remnants of his squad stirred, shivering, weary, their faces smeared with mud and the persistent grime of battle. The forest seemed quieter now, almost eerily so. But silence in war was never a comfort, it was a warning. The morning mist clung surface. The line between bravery and despair was razor thin, and each step echoed, then fell into the rain-soaked silence once more. Bodies lay scattered, the forest floor absorbing their presence as if it had always been. Darkness fully embraced the battlefield. Karl knew one truth above all. Tomorrow would be no gentler than today. War was unyielding, impartial, and unforgiving. The forest held its breath with him, waiting for the next day's storm, ready to swallow men whole if they faltered even for a moment. The next morning arrived, grey and muted, a heavy fog rolling through the forest like a shroud. Karl woke to the sound of distant artillery, faint at first, then growing steadily louder. The rain from the previous day had turned the battlefield into a quagmire. Mud clung to boots and uniforms, and every movement required immense effort. The men moved like ghosts through the mist, rifles ready, eyes scanning the blurred tree line for any sign of the French. The forest felt alive, almost sentient, as if it remembered every step, every fallen soldier, and whispered warnings through the creaking branches. Karl adjusted the strap of his rifle, feeling the cold bite of the metal against his hands. He glanced at his squad, their faces drawn and pale, eyes glazed with exhaustion. They had survived yesterday, but survival came at a cost. Each man carried invisible wounds, and the weight of witnessing death hung heavily on their shoulders. A sudden cry cut through the mist. Karl froze, signaling the squad to halt. A young German soldier staggered out from behind a moss-covered tree, clutching his side. His eyes were wide with terror, and a faint trail of blood marked his passage through the mud. Karl ran forward, helping him to a safer position. "Hold on," he said, pressing a hand against the wound. The boy nodded weakly, gasping, eyes darting to the trees as though expecting death to emerge at any moment. The French attacked again, advancing through the low fog in disciplined lines. Karl raised his he might never deliver. The forest seemed indifferent to human suffering, holding its secrets and watching silently. Artillery shells rained down, shaking the forest floor and splintering trees. Carl was thrown to the ground by a near explosion, ears ringing and vision blurred. He shook off the disorientation and pulled a wounded comrade into a shallow depression, pressing against a severe leg wound to slow the bleeding. The forest around them was a cacophony of shouts, gunfire, and the anguished cries of the injured. Despite the chaos, Carl maintained his focus. He coordinated the defense, signaling his men with precise gestures and quiet commands. They fought with grim determination, understanding that any lapse could be fatal. The mud made movement laborious, every step an ordeal, but retreat was not an option. The forest was alive with danger, yet it offered concealment for those willing to endure. By late afternoon, the intensity of the attacks began to wane. Both sides were exhausted, their energy spent in the relentless grind of battle. The French retreated slightly to reorganize, and Karl's squad used the lull to tend to the wounded, redistribute ammunition, and reinforce defensive positions. The forest floor was littered with evidence of the day's brutality: blood, mud, splintered trees, and broken weaponry, each piece a silent testament to the struggle for survival. Nightfall brought no true respite. Fires were lit cautiously, low and controlled, to provide warmth and a semblance of comfort. Karl moved among his men, checking for injuries, offering terse encouragement, and silently acknowledging the shared burden of the day. Conversations were sparse. The weight of what they had witnessed made idle chatter impossible. As Karl stared into the darkened forest, he reflected briefly on the lives lost, the horrors endured, and the long, uncertain days that still lay ahead. Before he could raise his weapon. Around him, his squad engaged with brutal efficiency, each movement choreographed by necessity and survival instinct. The forest erupted in violence, shouts and gunfire bouncing between tree trunks, mingling with the distant thud of artillery. Karl moved among his men, dragging the wounded to cover, shouting orders and firing when necessary. In the midst of battle, Karl noticed a small group of French soldiers attempting a flanking maneuver. He gestured to two of his men to intercept them. The ensuing clash was fierce and chaotic, close quarters among the mud, trees, and fog. Karl fought with precision, firing and retreating behind cover, while his squad executed the ambush with deadly skill. The forest became a blur of motion, mud, and blood. The cries of men mingling with the relentless thump of artillery. Hours passed without pause. The relentless back and forth took a heavy toll. Soldiers fell on both sides, wounded or dead, leaving the forest littered with bodies, discarded weapons, and broken equipment. Karl's mind was focused solely on survival and leadership. He checked ammunition, moved reinforcements, and ensured the wounded were stabilized as best as possible. Every decision carried weight. A single misstep could cost lives. By midday, the French launched a more organized assault, coordinating infantry with artillery fire. Shells exploded near Karl's position, shaking the ground and sending splinters of wood into the air. Karl dove into a shallow depression, his ears ringing, vision blurred. When he emerged, he assessed the situation quickly, directing his squad to counter the flanking troops while providing cover fire for the wounded. The forest floor was a chaotic battlefield, mud and blood mixing in a grim testament to the intensity of combat. Despite the chaos, Karl remained methodical. He moved from man to man, checking for injuries, offering terse words of encouragement, and maintaining the fragile cohesion of the squad. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but focus could not waver. Survival demanded attention to detail, split-second decisions, and an unrelenting will. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the French forces began to falter under sustained German resistance. Karl's squad exploited the moment, pushing forward cautiously, reclaiming ground lost earlier in the day. The forest, soaked and muddy, was littered with the remnants of battle-fallen soldiers, broken weapons, and the scars of artillery strikes. Every step forward was a hard-won victory, each inch of territory claimed at a tremendous cost. Night fell with no true respite. Fires were lit sparingly, and Karl moved among his men, ensuring the wounded were cared for, supplies distributed, and defensive positions reinforced. The forest seemed to watch silently, indifferent to the human struggle unfolding within its shadows. Around the campfires, soldiers whispered prayers, recounted fragments of home, or remained silent. Lost in memories and exhaustion, Karl stared into the darkness beyond the firelight, the weight of the past days pressing down on him. The forest was both ally and adversary, offering concealment while hiding unseen threats. He knew tomorrow would demand the same unrelenting effort, courage, and endurance. Survival was not a certainty, only a fragile balance maintained through vigilance, skill, and the will to continue. As he settled briefly, bracing for another restless night, Karl understood that the battle was far from over. The forest waited patiently, ready to test the limits of men, their resolve, and their humanity once more. The forest was alive with movement before dawn, but the subtle sounds were almost imperceptible, faint rustle of leaves, the soft crunch of boots on mud, the distant murmur of artillery preparing to awaken the day. Karl rose silently, muscles stiff from the previous day's relentless combat. Around him, his squad moved cautiously, checking weapons and scanning the dense tree line. Each man knew that in these forests, death could emerge from any shadow, any sound, and the line between life and demise was razor thin. A cold wind blew through the branches, carrying the metallic scent of blood mixed with damp earth. Karl breathed it in, steadying himself, forcing focus on the immediate, survival, strategy, and his men. His mind briefly wandered to the village he had left behind, the narrow cobblestone streets, the bakery's warm scent, his family sleeping peacefully, unaware of the horrors unfolding in the forests far from home. The thought was fleeting. There was no time for longing, only action. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, Karl spotted movement of French scouting party attempting to navigate through the northern edge of the forest. He signaled his squad to take positions, sliding low through the mud, using every fallen log and trench as cover. When the scouts advanced closer, Karl fired, the rifle's crack piercing the fog. One soldier fell immediately, while the others scattered, returning fire. The forest erupted into chaos once more. Gunfire echoed between trees, punctuated by the dull thuds of distant artillery. Karl moved among his men, dragging a wounded comrade into the relative safety of a shallow depression. The young soldier's leg was badly shattered, and Karl pressed a hand against the wound, murmuring commands over the cacophony of battle. There was no time for consolation. Survival demanded precision and unflinching resolve. Hours passed in relentless combat. The French pushed steadily, coordinating infantry assaults with sporadic artillery fire. Karl's squad responded with disciplined efficiency, moving in tight formations through the mud, using every advantage the forest offered. Trees became shields, trenches became temporary fortresses, and every fallen comrade a reminder of the stakes. The forest floor was a mosaic of mud, blood, splintered wood, and discarded Rafflesia, brutal testament to the relentless grind of survival. By midday, the intensity of battle escalated. Karl witnessed a French soldier separated from his unit, attempting to navigate through the forest alone. His instinct flared, he fired without hesitation. The boy fell, mud splattering across his uniform. Karl's heart did not waver. Mercy was impossible here. The forest demanded ruthlessness, a will to endure at any cost. Despite exhaustion, Karl maintained leadership. He redistributed ammunition, reinforced positions, and checked on the wounded. Each man's survival depended on the cohesion of the squad, and Karl was the fulcrum holding them together. Every decision carried life or death consequences. As afternoon gave way to evening, the French assault began to falter. Karl seized the opportunity, coordinating a cautious push forward. Mud clung to boots and uniforms, the forest floor a treacherous obstacle. Every step required effort. The aftermath of days of relentless fighting etched into every tree, every patch of mud, every shattered branch. Karl rose slowly, his body exhausted, his uniform caked in dirt and blood. Around him, the remaining members of his squad moved cautiously, faces drawn and eyes hollow. Survival had thinned their numbers, and the weight of loss hung over them like a suffocating shroud. The clearing ahead. once vibrant and green, was now a desolate expanse of churned mud, broken weapons, and scattered bodies. The faint smell of gunpowder mingled with the metallic temps of blood lingering in the damp air. Carl surveyed the battlefield, noting the cost of victory and the price of survival. Each step forward was a negotiation with death, each breath a triumph of endurance. A distant cry broke the silence. The French, exhausted and scattered, were retreating. Carl signaled his men to advance cautiously, aware that the forest could conceal traps or lingering snipers. They moved forward methodically, rifles raised, eyes scanning for any movement. Every fallen tree, every shadow, and every rustle of leaves could be a hidden threat. The battle had stripped the forest of its peace, leaving behind scars that would not fade. Carl and his squad navigated the wreckage, tending to the few wounded still able to move. They worked silently, knowing that words could not undo the horrors they had witnessed, nor comfort those who would not rise again. Each action was precise, efficient, a blend of survival instinct and weary compassion. As they reached the center of the clearing, Carl noticed a young French soldier, separated from his unit, crawling through the mud. The boy's uniform was torn, face streaked with blood, eyes wide with terror. Carl's rifle was raised instinctively, but he paused. The forest had already claimed so many lives. He had no need to take another. Instead, he lowered his weapon, signaling the boy to retreat, to survive if he could. The small act of mercy was fleeting, yet it reminded Carl of the fragile humanity that still lingered amidst the carnage. Hours passed with the French retreating, artillery quieting, and the battlefield falling into an uneasy stillness. Carl's squad moved cautiously, securing positions, tending wounds, and preparing for whatever might come next. The forest, vast and indifferent, seemed to exhale, its patience enduring, its silence a stark contrast to the violence that had consumed days. By late afternoon, the sun broke weakly through the fog, casting a pale light over the devastated landscape. Carl stood atop a slight rise, surveying the forest, the clearing, and the remnants of the battle. The toll of war was evident in every detail: mud-streaked uniforms, bloodied hands, the expressions of men hardened beyond their years. Yet, despite the devastation, survival had prevailed. The remaining men gathered, quiet and solemn, reflecting on the days that had passed. Carl looked at them, acknowledging their endurance, their courage, and the cost they had paid. There was no triumph in their eyes, no celebration, only the relief of having endured, and the recognition that survival was both victory and burden. As night fell over the forest for the final time in this chapter, fires were lit cautiously, small and controlled. Carl and his squad sat among the faint glow, tending to the wounded, sharing what little food remained, and speaking softly of home. The forest, silent and indifferent, watched over them, its scars a testament to the violence it had witnessed. Carl allowed himself a moment of reflection, eyes scanning the darkened treetops, mind replaying the horrors, the losses, and the rare moments of mercy. The war had stripped everything down to its raw essence: survival, endurance, and the fragile humanity that clung to life amidst destruction. And as he closed his eyes for a brief rest, the forest whispered around him, solemn, enduring reminder that while battles might end, the memory of them, and the scars they left on men and land alike, would remain forever. The war was over for now, but its echoes would endure, etched into the souls of those who survived, and into the forest itself.